Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of this video podcast series, CIES Talk. This brand new series is brought to you by CIES, the International Center for Sports Studies. They are an independent study center located in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. CIES provides research and top-level education to the world of sports. To find out more about the work that they do, visit CIES.ch. Debola Adebanjo is my name. And on this podcast, I'll be speaking with experts in different sectors of the sports industry. They will share their insights on their professional and academic experiences and how all of that fits into their previous and current roles, and as well as the impacts they're making in the sports industry at large. Now, speaking of impact, our very first guest today is one that has made an impact on me in my academic venture with the FIFA Master program. In case you didn't know, the FIFA Master program is Europe's #1 sports management program, teaching the humanities, management, and law of sports. They are the #1 program in Europe for the 12th year running. Now, Dr. Kevin Tallec Marston, whom you'll be hearing from today, was in charge of my academic project. And anyone you ask about Kevin will tell you that his attention to detail is top notch. For me personally, it's his immaculate listening skill. The fact that he is just keen to listen to any and every idea around him. Maybe they'll also mention his fashionable sense of pastel colors. But hey, to introduce Dr. Kevin properly, he is a research fellow and academic project manager at CIES. Kevin is also an alumnus of the prestigious FIFA Master program. And more importantly, for this conversation, he is a published author. Welcome, Kevin. How are you?
Thank you, Debola. It's a pleasure and a real joy to see you and to share some time with you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Great to have you. There are so many things about you that I just, spoke about. In my head, I know about you being an academic researcher. I know about you being a project manager. But one thing that hasn't quite registered in my head is the fact that you were also in the FIFA Master program. What year was this?
That was a long time ago. It was 23 years ago now that I started. So yeah, 2002. So it was the third edition of the course. So we were all very much guinea pigs at the time.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think is the secret that has kept the FIFA Master on top this long? That has kept it as relevant, that has kept it as exciting and prestigious? I mean, what do you think it is?
Well, I think ultimately it comes down to the DNA of the program and the humanity of the program. And I don't mean humanity in humanity's sense. I mean the people in the sense. We've had such a gift of having incredible people. And I firmly believe not just that life is about people, but education is first and foremost about people. Mm-hmm. And we've had incredible staff members, teachers, administrators, and obviously amazing students. And so all of that has been part of the human aspect of the course. And then in terms of the DNA, the way the program has been organized with students moving, not staff moving. So students are moving. It creates quite a unique experience in respect to many other programs, is that students create a bond and they have to trust each other. And then they have to navigate through the journey of the year through 3 different countries, 3 languages, 3 systems, 3 academic cultures, all of that. And it creates every year a completely unique but similar experience. And you've done it. You've seen what that has, and you felt that. And so I think that unique journey, which is not just an intellectual and a learning and an academic one, but it's also a life journey. And I think that combined with the great people is really why we are top, I think, for the last 12 years or so, maybe more. I think it's 12 or something.
And now that you mentioned it, thanks for your brilliant answer, by the way. I think you captured that perfectly. Now that you mentioned it, I am just reflecting on how different the academic styles in all 3 countries were. I mean, maybe because I was in the thick of it, I didn't quite put that into consideration, but now they were quite different and they had their strengths, and it all added into that very good experience. I think if as a student, if you can navigate and survive those 3, as different as they are, you're definitely prepared for whatever it is on the other side of the program. So yeah, it's a great one. But I'm curious, what was your life like before the FIFA Masters in 2002? This is me basically saying, what were you doing before? I don't know you. But yeah, what was that journey like before that?
So if we're going to do the life journey, so I had two lives, if you will, one sort of since 2002 and one prior to 2002. And the one before 2002 was a somewhat transatlantic life, living in both the US and then spending a lot of time in Europe and in France, particularly. I studied in the US before that, and then I worked in the US, and I worked actually in sport. It was always a deep passion of mine since I was a small child, or I could go even back generations. That sport has always been in my sort of family, if you will. And so with that, I worked as an educator, I worked as a coach, I worked as an administrator in sport, in a sports center with clubs and with children and young people. And I was always very interested in the educational side of sport, which, surprise, surprise, later on becomes essentially my second life. But I also did a lot of sports management and event management. I worked with CONCACAF at the time. I worked with in the early years of Major League Soccer, well before David Beckham, if people will remember sort of how that was almost the starting point. Well, there were 10 years well before that, and I had the chance to be part of the beginnings of that. It was very interesting as a volunteer, as an intern, and then spending a lot of time in the event management side. So I brought, when I came to the FIFA Master, I brought essentially the sport, event management. I brought education and teaching. I'd already had teaching experience and coaching experience and administrative experience. So it all, in a sense, prepared me very nicely for that moment.
No, absolutely. And I'm piecing a lot of things together now. The education bit, especially with children, it explains the patience that you have with people. Totally explains it. But yeah, that's a lot. I think I asked that question for myself, to be honest. I'm sure some people got a lot of context to all of where we're going. But yeah, I think it was a personal question that I'm really, happy to finally know. We know what happened prior to 2002. After 2002, you did stay on with the FIFA Master program, though being employed by CIES, if I'm correct, as the academic project manager. That's probably not the exact title. Please correct me if I'm wrong. What would you say has been the most rewarding thing about this experience? If my math is correct, that's about 20 years now.
Well, yeah,
my math is very bad.
No, your math is not bad at all, Debola. So actually, right after the master, I initially, which like many people who came to the FIFA Master and still subsequently have all imagined going to work in the sports industry, for lack of a better term, and I kind of thought that was going to be my path, and of course, I didn't go that path. And there's a few of us, I would say, in the overall FIFA Master community who have not gone the sort of in the normal road, and there's a couple of people who have gone into academia, into education, and so I just happened to be one of the first in doing that 20 some years ago, and I started actually working at De Montfort University. So before coming to CIES, I actually spent a year there after the graduation here, and then I worked. I had some time searching, figuring out, and starting a PhD. And then that led me to back to DMU, I should say, where I worked with the wonderful colleagues there. And then I left in the beginning of 2005 to come to CIES, and I've been at Neuchâtel, lovely little Neuchâtel, ever since. So it's 10 years, almost 10 years to the day.
Oh, interesting. What would you say is the most rewarding thing about this experience so far? You talked about the people the other time, but is there a different variation to that? Because I'm guessing you most likely say the people again. But yeah, personally,
your intuition is good, but I will answer the other part, because I think there is, the people are absolutely, for me, one of the most rewarding and incredible things is just the people I've met and been able to teach, grow with. I mean, teach is kind of a pompous word. To learn with, maybe is a better term. over the years. But yes, I mean, I think one of the most interesting things is just been my own personal learning journey in that sense. I've grown and learned a tremendous about myself, about life, about what's truly important, and all of those deeper philosophical questions, I suppose. Which, as you know, I enjoy engaging with students on a regular basis.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you much later on, some of the things that you've learned from them, like radical, life-changing things you've learned, which I can imagine you'll have a few answers for me. But before that, I want to touch quickly, still on the FIFA Masters. One of the very important things that the program puts into consideration is how people from different walks of life, people from different countries, different experiences can navigate those 11 months thereabout. And I remember my interview process, which you were on the other end of. You did put a couple of questions to me about how reinforcing, basically, how would you engage with other people. And I think now that I've done the masters on the other side, I can see why that question was very important, because boy, we did have lots of people with different opinions, ones that sometimes you might struggle to work with. But like I said at the start of the conversation, that is one thing you are so good at, just being able to understand or seemingly understand where someone is coming from, being able to make everyone feel heard. That is something a lot of the lecturers at the program do. And then find a way to bring all our thoughts together to say, maybe this is where we should be looking, to as people working in sports. What tip would you give to me, even, or to anyone listening, on how to manage differences in approaches and in opinions, because that's what sports really is at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely. Sport is truly global and truly universal in that way, which can make it very complicated, because on the one hand, everyone thinks they understand. And so everyone has their own understanding, their own frame of reference. And yet everybody's coming into sport with their own culture, their own language, their own really approach to life. And that oftentimes can clash, or at least not align properly. And so one of the difficulties, obviously, in the course of a life journey in the FIFA Master, and with respect to such a diversity, is how do those align? How do they interact? How do they mold? How do they adjust to each other? Yeah. And all while still remaining true to who you are and who everyone is. And I think that's key, is the authenticity. If we're not authentic, we're nothing. So there is a sense of maybe stepping aside from our own selves, I think, during the course of the year. It's what I try to encourage students to do during the year, is to step outside of their own paradigm, right? In order to listen, welcome in, and hear where everyone else is coming from, because there will be similarities, there will be drastic differences. And but in order to live together, you have to be able to understand that. You have to be able to integrate that into your own self, even if you disagree. And I've seen incredible student friendships develop over the course of a year addition. Here, people who at the beginning of the year you would think, wow, they will never get along, and in the end they are inseparable as brothers or sisters. And that is simply because they're able to step out of themselves and then really, as you said, Debola, listen. I think listening is key. If we have two ears, it's because, and one mouth, it's probably because we spend twice as much time listening as we do talking.
Sounds like an African adage. I can't remember from where, but I'm pretty sure that came from my country.
It might be. It might very well be.
No, well, that's a good response. I totally get that. I mean, I feel like the advice you would hear from a lot of, especially communication experts, which is my industry, is like, just listen more. And it does help. It changes things a lot. And this is one thing I wanted to ask earlier that I said we'll get to later. It's about, you spoke about the students and how you met, an incredible, diverse bunch over the years. Can you remember an opinion you once had that you then changed owing to something a student, or maybe now I'll give you leeway and even widen your scope, anyone shared with you, really?
Sure. I mean, there are obviously lots, hundreds and hundreds of conversations and interactions in the classroom, just after class, in tutorial sessions, all of that. There is so much interaction that is
You're leaving out the
also.
drinks.
Sorry?
You're leaving out the happy hour, the drinks.
Oh yeah, and meeting also outside of the room, and I love being able to have a social interaction, because I think that's where we can also reveal ourselves a bit. But the what I would and obviously all of that is always challenging to who we are as people, because people are different, and complementary in many ways, and we will constantly be adapting. But I guess when I thought about when I think about your question, I would say there is perhaps even more than something where I may have changed my mind. I would almost rather share something which has deepened my understanding, because I think on the one hand, it's almost easier to say that I changed my mind because of something that someone said to me. But I think it's almost even more impactful when I consider something that a student shared with me that really went down deep to the fundaments of how I view something, and refined that in a way that has made my approach to education even more, I hope, complete. And so what I would share on that is simply a conversation. It was a pub conversation. So after a class, and guest speakers and things, and we were discussing kind of what's education, etc. And I was asked by a student once how I viewed education. Like, well, what was education? Because they said, well, I sense with you that you're not just teaching us subject matter, right? You're not just teaching us history or research methods or governance or whatever. It's not the subject that's what's important. You are trying to do something slightly different. And it really made me think, yes, actually I am, perhaps. And in that sense, the student was bold enough to say, well, I think what you're doing is educo, which is an old Latin word, which is the root of education. So education comes from two words, a mix of educare and educere. Those are two Latin words, which are the senses of what education is. One, which means to kind of form, mold, bring up. That's educare. And one, educere, which is more to draw out, to essentially pull out almost the diamond in the chest, right? You're refining something. And it's very different if you think about the difference between educere and seducere. So to seduce, which means as English, it's the opposite. So instead of drawing something out, you are forcing something in. And in terms of education and how I would approach teaching, research, engaging with other people in the classroom and outside, I believe truly that this student really puts the nail on the head, that what I hope to do, or endeavor to do, is really accompany that journey of bringing out what is already inside, refining that in an interactive and ongoing process that really brings out the best and the full potential of another person.
Would you say that was your approach before, or you became more conscious about that approach after you had that interaction with a student?
I think it was intuitively, in some ways, my approach, going all the way back, as you said, to working with young people and education and teaching high school, even before ever coming to the FIFA Master. There was a sense of drawing out what is inside, rather than being the all-knowing font of knowledge. No, I don't think that's what a teacher is supposed to do. But I never really understood it until that moment. So I'm very grateful to that student. Who will remain nameless.
It makes sense. I got some Latin education just now from what you said. It also had me reflecting on what exactly it is you do. I mean, I've complimented a lot of these great skills that you have, but to be able to then piece it together, makes sense. Here I am learning a couple of years after the FIFA Masters. Yeah, that's the whole point, right? Thanks for that, Kevin. We've spoken a lot about. Sorry,
it's the long game, as you know, Debola.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not going to explain that. Hopefully someone who listens to this goes on to do the FIFA Master and then they figure it out. You will remember this moment. Let me keep the suspense as that. We've spoken at length about and reference to diversity of thoughts of people when it comes to the students, but a credit we should give to the masters as well is the diversity present in the people, the teachers. I would use that word particularly, who come into the classrooms to give to educate. Look at me using all the key, the buzzwords for this conversation to educate the students. And one person that I remember is Mike Cronin. I'm singling him out because he's super relevant for this conversation, like we'll be having. I believe if I can remember precisely, he taught us things about sports in Ireland. Very funny lecturer. We remember very interesting character. And interestingly, he is also the co-author of your book that I spoke about earlier on. How did you make that connection to start with before we go into the book that you've written?
Sure, thank you, Debola. Mike, obviously, I had initially when he was at De Montfort just recently. I think had arrived at DMU when I studied on the FIFA Master. He was kind of fresh there as a younger teacher, and I was still a student. And so I knew him initially in the classroom setting, and then afterwards, when I started working on my PhD and working at DMU, he was still there, and we exchanged quite a bit and really enjoyed. And he was very supportive, obviously, during my PhD and my doctoral studies, and taught me quite a lot. I was very, very fortunate to exchange with him and to work with him alongside him for those years. And then I've always stayed in touch. I mean, he moved off to Dublin shortly after I came to Leicester, so somewhere maybe around 2005 or 6, and has been the academic director for Boston College in Dublin since then, so almost 20 years. And we've regularly stayed in touch. He's come in and actually taught in my week of teaching in Leicester. He also comes and teaches on the FIFA Master, and we would meet. And there was a point in 2014 where we met in Lausanne at a conference. And I had been thinking about a particular topic of research and interest that was more a curiosity than anything else. It was a paragraph that I had written in my PhD probably in 2008 or something like that. And it was something that just kind of bothered me, and I just wanted to know more. And we talked about it on the sidewalk outside of the train station in Lausanne. And that conversation then ebbed and flowed into more thinking and research. And then there was an opportunity to actually write and publish a shorter piece about the topic in between about 2016 and 2018. So we worked on that together. And there was, I think the first draft of that, there was much too much material. It was like twice as much writing as there should have been. So Mike very, very smartly said, I think there's a book in here. And I probably would have left it at that, honestly. So I'm very grateful to Mike to have pushed me a little bit as well. And he just said, I think it really is something here. And so we spent some time in 2018, 2019, fleshing it out. And then it became a COVID project. So when we were all sitting at home working, and I had, some additional extra time that, you're just around, I was aspirated by this story and by the research. And Mike and I wrote the entire thing. And I actually don't think we've seen each other since COVID, but we finished the book together online.
Oh, wow. There's so much to unpack there, but let's just go straight to that said book because that is very important for this conversation. The title of the book is called Inventing the Boston Game, Football, Soccer, and the Origins of a National Myth. It is a book that delves into the origins of the beautiful game in the United States of America. Very interesting, just from this title, Kevin, because I've learned, especially in the FIFA Masters, about the origins of football, the origins of rugby across the United Kingdom. But it never even occurred to me that there is a US point of view to all of this. First, I think you should better introduce the book to us. You will do it justice than I can. When you're done summarizing it, I guess the next question that pops to my mind is why. I mean, that's a good place to start. But yes, if you can summarize the book and what it's about, I think that would be great for everyone watching.
Okay, so to summarize the book, I would begin really from two things. there is a monument that sits in the most important park in the city of Boston in the northeast of the US. And there's a very small, kind of nondescript, uninteresting monument that has no pictures or anything on it, just has an inscription and a bunch of names. And it's a monument that is supposed to honor the origins of football and soccer. So American gridiron football, but also soccer. And this monument has a very strange story. And that's one of the kind of key characters in the foundations of the book. And then there's another artifact. There's an object, which is it's claimed to be the oldest ball in existence that still is kind of used. And it's in a museum in Boston. And it's called the Oneida football because they were the Oneida Football Club. And the story begins in the middle of the 19th century. And if you recall from, we won't do a humanities lecture again, but if you recall from Leicester, modern sport in its current manifestation comes out of the end of the 19th century Britain and the British Empire, and the way the British schools were organized in many ways. And so that's how sport was codified, structured, organized, and spread in many ways. Now, when it was received elsewhere in the world, obviously things changed. It wasn't just a one-way diffusion, but part of the story is about diffusion of where sport comes from and how it evolves. And so the book really begins from these two objects, from the old evidence, if you will. And I know you had mentioned to me in some of your thoughts about the question of memory, because the book is really ultimately a question of how do we remember things? How do we then commemorate the past? How do we then reinterpret and reinvent that commemoration in order to serve a different purpose? Because maybe the one thing I would say on that, and if you have a question, or you want to drop in on this, but the monument in question was built and erected on the monument on Boston Common in the park in 1925. So 100 years ago, actually, this year, which is quite fun because we have an anniversary in November this year. So the monument was built in 1925, and the ball was donated even earlier than that. The ball was donated in 1922, I believe. And those objects sat in a museum and then in public view for a long time. And then around the 1994 World Cup, when the US hosted the FIFA World Cup, the monument was then reinterpreted as an origin point for soccer or association football in the United States, because someone said, well, they have a ball, it's round, it looks like a football. They must have been playing football. So they invented football in the United States, just like you remember William Abellis invented rugby, apparently, right? So there is a reinterpretation in 1994, and then subsequently, I won't give away the whole story, but there's a whole other unraveling of the story with a lot of mystery and some mischievousness. I like to say we almost went with a different title, that the whole question was a hoax. Was it a hoax? Was it just playing with history? And so it really ultimately asks these questions about what is memory? How do we record memory? So in objects, documents, artifacts, and promoting that. And then how is that memory remembered, written down, reinterpreted, and changed? Which I think is something that is common. It's not just a sporting question. If you think about all the monuments around the world that tell a certain story about the past, whether it's political, whether it's religious, whether it's geographic or whatever, all of those have a chance to be reinterpreted. And we've seen a lot of that in the last 10 years, actually. So that's there we are.
There's a lot to unpack there, obviously. But if I can do a quick summary from what I understood. So at the center of the book is a football team that played, I think you said Boston Common in Boston.
Correct.
Oneida Football Club. And about 60 or 70 years after, the men who played in that club then actively chose to preserve the history from what they believe they started, and then demonstrate how maybe their actions and what they were doing back then influenced football or soccer in America. Is that a how did I do with that summary?
That's very correct. You actually probably did it better than I did. in shorter time.
I don't think so. But thank you for the compliment. A lot has been said here about history and about memory. You did share an excerpt of the book with me. Thank you very much. And there is something that struck me when I had a quick look through, because here it says running through this book are questions relating to history and memory, and how the latter is a powerful tool in the creation of foundation myths, both local and national. And I guess the big question here is how much, of history is our memory, because I mean we're actively seeing people trying to keep and document an experience that they had. um, how much of history is memory, and how are they independent of each other? I guess will be a common theme across the book, or a common question that the book will be trying to answer, I believe.
Well, it's an excellent question. The fine line between history and memory, and memory is there. There's some we worked with a lot of literature. There's a lot of wonderful writing, and already people have thought about the question of memory and history for 100 years in academia. So we're certainly not the first to question this. We're just looking at a specific case study and what that means. But in history is what history or maybe what I would say is in English there's a challenge with that, because history is, on the one hand, what we receive from the past. It is the past. It's our memory of the past. But it's a word that applies to all of that. And that's kind of messy. The Germans are a little bit more straightforward, and the Germans have two words. One for essentially what actually happened, and then the writing and reconstruction, the building of that, which is Geschichte, which is a different word. And so they actually have a distinction between what really is kind of memory and what is history in that sense. And in our understanding of history, obviously, we're looking at it's facts, dates, events, people, its lives, its motivations, its deceptions, it's all of these things. But we're also trying to reconstruct that in a certain way within a context which is very different from our own. And one of the biggest challenges, obviously, in doing history is what we call presentism, which is looking back in the past with the lenses of the present. So it's me saying, 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, I'm judging how those people are acting in a certain way based on where I am today. And so I think one of the guiding principles that I've always had in my academic training in terms of a history is historians are not judges. Historians should not judge. That's not the purpose. It's to provide a credible and accurate account to the past, as complete as possible from the fragments that remain, because history only leaves us fragments, whether it's oral memory, written memory, visual memory, artifacts and monuments, or places and ruins of places. That's all we have left to go on. And so there is a huge challenge in order to understand the past in a way of putting those pieces together in order to tell an actual story, a narrative. And I think you kind of hinted at it, but one of the biggest challenges in writing that is the why. So why do things happen in the past? We always want to know why. Humans are obsessed with the why, right? Yeah. And it's probably the most difficult and tempting thing to try to explain. And maybe I'd leave that for later in the conversation. But it's not something that drove, if you will.
If I hear you correctly, you can have history without memory, but memory is not enough to properly document history.
Yeah, memory is just the memory, and memory is partial, and it's fragmented, and it's biased, and all of that.
That is interesting. I didn't think about it like that, because memory feels like, how lately there is in the language being used, especially if you're in therapy or you tend to be around people who use therapy speak. They say your feelings are just about valid enough. Does that in a way? Do you think about memory as such? As it's what you feel, it's your experience, but maybe it's not in the entirety, valid? I don't know if
Absolutely.
I'm making the right lines there.
Absolutely. I would even call that emotional memory in the sense of, and maybe this is a nice way to link as well to the book. The book is very much about a story of a group of people, human beings like you and me, who lived at a certain time, did certain things, and later in life remembered with specific, very clear emotions about what they did. And they had some evidence,
Yeah.
they had apparently a ball, they had some newspaper clippings, and they had memories and journal writings and their own letters and correspondence that talk about their memories from the past. And what they did is, with that, obviously that brings a certain color to the past, but they put all of those pieces together in order to retell a story of the past that obviously made them feel probably good. We like to brush up and kind of or airbrush out the things of our memory that are inconvenient or that are frustrating. It's also a mechanism of survival in terms of human psychology. But the fact in the story of the book, for example, we had a group of people who, on the one hand, on the surface level, you could say, wow, these were the most powerful, richest, well-educated, best privileged, everything you could possibly imagine in Northeastern United States society from the middle of the 19th century to the early 20th century. And so obviously they were just remembering and trying to enforce their position on society by making another monument. And that's the context which is happening around all of this, of course. But it's also, their memory is much, much more particular, because our memory is always individual. It's always going to be imprinted with our own personal experiences. And what ultimately comes out of this story, as I would argue it, is that it's also it's a story about how we remember friendship, values, and part of the story is actually about how human relationships can be probably the most steadfast thing that we actually experience in our human existence over the course of our lives, and how that then animates everything we do. And so the people that are the men in this story, I mean, they not all of them, by the end of their lives, not all of them actually stayed in that 1%. It's very interesting, because we sort of expect, oh, well, they were all privileged, etc. And actually, they weren't. It's quite surprising. There's some interesting things in the story. And what they ended up doing is supporting each other. And there's this incredible human story behind it all. And there's a little bit of boyish mischievousness, I would have to say, because they're maybe stretching the truth at times and remembering emotionally how they would like things to have been. But it's all embedded in a sort of mystery. I don't want to say it's a murder mystery, because it's not a murder mystery in the end. Hopefully there's no murder at the end. So I'll let you find out.
Do we have a true crime in here? Just kidding. But yeah, you just said a whole lot there, Kevin, and it's giving answers to some of the things that are running through my head. But I feel like where I have finally landed or concluded on is that we must give credit, regardless of the affluence nature of these people who are retelling their memories. We must give credit to the fact that there was a conscious effort to prevent erasure of their history, which is something I think,
As well.
whether rich or poor, we all should try to imbibe in our lives. But I'm just curious if where that intention really came from. And you did say a lot about friendship and relieving what they had, but were they also trying to adjust to the times, do you think? Did they see maybe like a revolution? Because American football, not soccer now, is really big, and obviously they must have felt the origins of this now big and widely accepted sports came from our days or our kickabouts at the common ground. Was it them just being adjusting to the times, or was there just a strong sense of ownership to something that they created?
Well, I think there was definitely an adjustment to the times, and I would go even beyond sport. And part of the book also talks about the vast transformation of American society from the 19th century to the 1920s. And I mean, many people obviously will know, but the country changed massively over the course of about 50, 60 years. Huge amounts of immigration, societal upheaval, changes to social structures inside of the society, industrialization. And all of that created a completely new world from the world that these little boys were playing around during, actually, I must add, the Civil War of the United States, which tore apart a nation for 5 years and much longer. And so as they came into later in life, they were living in a completely different culture and country than the one in which they had grown up. And so there was an impetus societally to preserve a sort of identity, a question of what's our national identity? Who are we as people? We're disappearing. And all of these other people are kind of taking space. And this is a common theme. We see it still today in the present moment, where questions of identity are very present in the world. And so that context, it goes well beyond sport. And then, of course, in the specifics to sport, they saw something that was this big phenomenon in the 1920s, which was at that time amateur collegiate American football, because it was filling stadiums, just in the way that association football was filling stadiums in Britain across the world, in South America. There was this mass spectacle movement. And they said, well, actually, didn't we sort of start that? We must have invented that. We were there at the beginning. And so there's a sense of legitimate ownership that they were trying to communicate. Now, whether or not that is fully true in the creation of an origin story is all really what the book is talking about. I mean, there are aspects of truth and there's aspects of fun and mischievousness.
Yeah, totally. I think that answers my question. Thanks for that. You've referenced the world outside of sports. You've been able to take the experiences from this story you're trying to tell of these men to our everyday lives, as it concerns documenting our stories, as it concerns human relationship. At the moment, I think technology has made it a lot easier for people to, individually document their lives, their stories, their histories, tell their narrative, share what they can, what their memory has preserved for them, and what they feel, is what is their truth in that sense. Do you think we have it easy in that regard, especially in the era of social media? I mean, we don't have to exactly compare it to these men from the book who tried to do theirs in the 1920s. But how easy do we have it, and do you think we're doing it right?
That's a very difficult question, and as you know, I'm not a judge, so I won't tell you yes or no. But I will comment on that. And I think what the challenge is in many respects, the world is different, and yet it's the same. Humanity doesn't change a tremendous amount. At the time of the book, the world, at least the sort of, let's say, the Western world, the US at that point, is undergoing what we would call a graphic revolution. So the printing press is everywhere. There's written word everywhere. But one of the biggest changes at that point is the massive growth of image over the course of the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. And it's interesting because everybody thinks that today's world that is very image focused, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, all of the visual media that exist, well, it's not the first time we've seen that. Now, what is perhaps interesting and different, I guess, today is the instantaneous nature of it. Say the faster technology gets, the more difficult and challenging it is, in a sense, ironically, to live in the present moment. Because if, and you see this anywhere you go, most people spend their time watching everything through a second screen, life through a second screen, right? And perhaps that is going to be one of the biggest challenges to just being present as a human being to other people and to yourself, but also particularly for future historians of this era now. How are they going to look back? First of all, because obviously a lot of memory will disappear. The social media memory, will it all actually be saved somewhere in a cloud? And will we be able, there's an absolute enormous amount of information and material that's there. But I do not envy. I am so glad I am not going to be a historian in 100 years' time, because I do not envy the task. It's hard enough today to deal with the past that we have. Yeah. So I think the instantaneous nature of the world that we live in makes it difficult. It kind of unmoors us from the past. We're so very present-minded. across all things. And that does not help us, because as human beings, we have a beginning, we have an end.
Yeah.
And if we step out of that, it makes it difficult.
No, totally. That's a brilliant reflection, and it took my mind as well to AI, the advancement of artificial intelligence, and how would we really know what the truth is, or what fact is in history in about 100 years, if things can easily get tweaked, and things can easily become whatever it is someone wants to make it to be. So yeah, that's a very interesting fact. I thought when I was asking that question, I struck gold in the fact that you're going to say, "Oh well, this generation, great work, you have it easy." But no, there's a lot to think about.
Well,
on that.
and the question of AI and the question of truth. I don't remember who it was, but a very big public figure about probably 10 or 15 years ago mentioned that we are in a crisis of truth in our modern world. It's a crisis of truth because we don't know what's true anymore.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I would like to put that in a historical perspective. And one of the things the book reveals in the final chapter, for anybody who wants to read all the way to the end, is how truth can be manipulated. Already 100 years ago, photographs can be doctored. Things can be changed. And so what story really are we trying to tell, and what is truth? And so none of these problems that we have today are brand new. They are eternal problems of the human condition. It's how we deal with truth and how we deal with ourselves and authenticity. But the world we have here, which is so instantaneous, there's a sense of challenge to us being really present. Where is the real presence in who we are as people, to each other, in the world that we live in, and how do we, whether it's sport or anything else beyond sport, that the media world that we live in today, and the social media particularly, makes it difficult to be truly present.
Interesting. I have a couple of questions that I feel like if anybody has been listening, you already answered. I was going to say, what are you hoping this book will give to scholars, students, and the world in general? And now you've just, literally spoken about how it will show us that just in that era as well, the truth was being manipulated. I mean, and that in itself sounds so interesting. I think anyone should want to grab a copy and read all the way to the end to be sure they can, put some context into all of this. But I'm curious to know if this book will be introduced to the FIFA Master class. I mean, we have the origins of rugby and a lot of other sports. How about the United States for a change? Or do we already have that in the curriculum?
Well, we do have a little bit on the history of sport in North America, and I know that actually Mike has already spoken about it, I think, in the last year or two editions. So since you have left, Debola, we continue to innovate and improve the curriculum.
Good to hear. So, I mean, your book is out in stores already. Does that mean the 2026 edition will get an insight into all your research and everything in this book?
I certainly hope so, and to exchange with them also about the origin stories of sport and football in their countries, because I think one of the things I've learned the most is that it's a very universal experience. Despite how idiosyncratic and unique every story is to each culture and nation, every country has its own origin stories. We all have our myths and origins, and learning from those is tremendously enriching.
We all have myths and origins. That's totally something I'm going to start using in any conversation right now. You know what my myth is? You know where I'm from? But yes, that is a very salient point. Thanks, Dr. Kevin, for that. Just a quick reminder, I have mentioned that the book is in stores, but you can also buy it online. I mean, what would it be if you're going to get it online in this digital age? It is online. And the link is in the description of this video. We've made it easier for you to grab a copy. Thank you very much again for being here, Dr. Kevin. Kevin's book, Inventing the Boston Game, Football, Soccer, and the Origins of a National Myth, again, is online and available in stores worldwide, I dare say. Thanks for your time, Kevin. It's been a very great conversation. I've learned, as always, from you, your very in-depth perspective on all these issues. I hope, that we can have you again.
Thank you so much, Debola. It's been a joy always to see you. And remember, we always stay in touch. It's only the beginning of the game. It's not the end of the game. So.
Yes. Yes, totally. You've been watching CIES Talks, brought to you by CIES, the International Center for Sports Studies. CIES are the parent body for the FIFA Master program that churn out sports professional working across the top level in the industry, like myself and Kevin, I dare say. Debola Adebanjo is my name. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.